Don't, it still hurts there. The rancher did it anyway. And then, and he had a wife. Ethan Mallory woke before the sun, as he had every morning for the past 35 years. The chill in the air bit at his face, but he barely noticed any more. Branch, surrounded by open fields, the smell of hay and the steady rhythm of animals had made him almost part of the land itself. Bows. His boots crunched over the frost-covered ground as he walked toward the barn, each step echoing in the quiet that only comes before dawn. There was a rhythm to his life, a rhythm that many in town admired from a distance but did not understand. Ethan's hands were rough and scarred. The palms told stories of years spent tending cattle, mending fences, and hauling hay. He had learned early that the land demanded respect, and those who tried to take shortcuts usually ended up paying the price. Every morning he ran through the same routine: check the fences, feed the animals, inspect the water troughs, and make sure nothing was out of place. There was comfort in the routine, a sense of control in a life that often felt unpredictable. Despite the calm exterior, Ethan carried a weight no one could see. Beneath the surface of his steady life lay a collection of memories he couldn't escape. Years ago, he had made choices that had hurt someone he cared about deeply. The memory didn't fade. It lingered in quiet moments, in the pauses between the work, in the nights when sleep didn't come easily. He would sometimes hear the words echo in his mind, words he wished he could take back. Don't, it still hurts there. He remembered the day vividly. It was a summer afternoon, the sun high and hot in the sky, and he had been careless, too confident in his own judgment. He didn't mean to hurt anyone, but his actions had consequences. That memory had haunted him ever since, a quiet reminder that even the strongest, most capable people could make mistakes. Every choice mattered, and every mistake left a mark, even if no one else saw it. As he moved through the barn, Ethan's mind wandered to the present. The ranch had been in his family for generations, passed down from his father, who had taught him everything he knew about cattle, horses, and hard work. His father had been a stern man, a man of few words, but Ethan had learned the most important lessons from watching him work. Discipline, patience, and respect for the land were values etched into his very bones. Ethan's father had passed away when he was in his 20s, leaving him with the ranch and a sense of responsibility that sometimes felt heavier than the work itself. He had taken over the operations, managing the animals, the equipment, and the finances. Over the years, he had become known in the town as a man who could handle anything. But that reputation didn't protect him from loneliness or from the echoes of the past. The barn smelled of hay and horses, a familiar scent that brought both comfort and a little sadness. Ethan ran his hands over the wooden beams, feeling the grooves and scratches left by years of use. The barn had witnessed every stage of his life, from a young man learning the trade to the man he had become. It held his triumphs and his regrets, silent witness to the choices he had made and the mistakes he hoped no one would ever remember. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the ranch came alive. The animals stirred, responding to the familiar sounds of Ethan's movements. The cattle lowed softly, the horses whinnied, and the chickens clucked as he scattered feed. Each interaction was routine, yet Ethan treated it with care, knowing that every living thing on the ranch depended on him. There was no room for carelessness here. The land demanded responsibility, and he had learned that the hard way. Even with the work to occupy his hands and mind, there were moments when the past crept in. He would sometimes catch himself staring at a fence line, a field, or a tree, and the memory would come unbidden. The words he had heard years ago repeated themselves, haunting and persistent. He didn't speak of them to anyone. The people in town knew him as quiet, reserved, and capable. They didn't know the storm that sometimes raged inside him, a storm fueled by regret, guilt, and the longing for something he had lost long ago. Ethan's life was built on routine, but routine didn't erase memory. The ranch was both a sanctuary and a prison, a place where he could lose himself in work but never escape the echoes of his past. The wide open fields offered freedom, yet they also reminded him of isolation. There were no distractions here, no crowds, no noise, just the land and the animals and the quiet. And in that quiet, his memories were loud. He remembered the way the person he had hurt had looked at him after the incident. Their eyes had been full of pain, confusion, and disappointment. Ethan had wanted to apologize, to make it right, but the words had stuck in his throat. He had walked away, thinking time would heal the wounds, but it never had. The hurt lingered. And now, years later, it felt almost as fresh as the day it happened. He carried that weight every day, a silent reminder that actions could not be undone. As the sun rose higher, Ethan finished his morning chores and paused to look over the fields. The cattle grazed quietly, the horses moved with gentle grace, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. It was a peaceful scene, one that could easily be mistaken for contentment. But Ethan knew better. He knew that beneath the calm surface lay the complexities of a man shaped by work, responsibility, and regret. Despite the weight he carried, Ethan found small moments of joy in the life he had built. The laughter of a horse when it recognized him, the soft nuzzle of a calf, the simple satisfaction of a fence well mended. These were the things that reminded him why he stayed. They reminded him that life, even with its mistakes, offered moments worth living for. He clung to those moments, finding in them a reason to keep moving forward. The town often spoke of Ethan with respect, sometimes with a hint of fear. He was known as a man who didn't back down, who could handle whatever came his way. But the townspeople only saw the exterior. They didn't see the nights he spent alone, thinking about choices and consequences. They didn't see the way he flinched at memories that refused to fade. And they certainly didn't see the longing for connection, the quiet hope that maybe, someday, he could find a way to make peace with his past.
Ethan's life was a balancing act between duty and desire, between the land he loved and the memories that haunted him.
Each day brought new challenges, new decisions, and new reminders of the past. Yet he continued, driven by a mixture of stubbornness, responsibility, and the faint hope that one day he could find forgiveness, both from those he had hurt and from himself. By mid-morning, the barn was quiet again. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the fields. The world was alive with color and movement, yet Ethan felt the familiar tug of solitude. He walked the fence lines, checking for breaks, leaning on the wooden rails, and letting his mind wander. The words returned once more, soft but insistent. "Don't." "It still hurts there." He paused, letting the wind carry them away, but he knew they would never truly disappear. The ranch had taught him many things, but it had not taught him how to escape the consequences of his own actions. That was a lesson he would carry with him, just as he carried the tools, the animals, and the land. It was a lesson that shaped who he was, a lesson that would follow him into every decision, every relationship, every quiet moment when he thought no one was watching. And so, Ethan Mallory continued his day, moving with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned to live with both the weight of responsibility and the burden of memory. He tended the land, cared for the animals, and carried his secret quietly, knowing that the life he led was one of hard work, reflection, and the hope that maybe, one day, the pain could ease. The ranch stretched endlessly before him, fields rolling into the horizon, mountains standing guard in the distance, and the sky painted with the promise of a new day. It was a life of solitude, of labor, of memories that refused to fade. But it was his life, and Ethan faced it each day with determination, strength, and the quiet hope that someday, somehow, he might find peace. The winter that year was harsher than Ethan had expected. Snow fell earlier than usual, coating the ranch in a thick, cold blanket. The wind howled across the fields, rattling the old barn doors and sending shivers down anyone's spine who dared to linger outside. But Ethan was never one to stay inside when work needed to be done. The animals depended on him, and the land demanded attention. He pulled his thick coat tighter around him and trudged toward the fence line, his boots sinking slightly into the fresh snow. The cattle huddled together, their breaths steaming in the cold air. They looked vulnerable, yet somehow resilient, and Ethan felt a pang of responsibility stronger than ever. He moved among them, checking for signs of stress or illness, patting the animals on their backs, whispering quiet encouragements. Despite the cold, he worked with careful precision, knowing that even a small mistake could become dangerous in this weather. The ranch had taught him that every choice mattered, and in moments like this, that lesson was never more real. As he moved toward the far pasture, he noticed something unusual. One of the cattle had wandered too close to the edge of a frozen creek. The ice looked thin, and the risk of breaking through was high. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knew that a wrong step could be catastrophic.
He called out to the animal, his voice firm but calm, trying to guide it back to safety.
The snow crunched under his boots as he approached, his hands ready to act quickly if needed. It happened in an instant. The animal panicked, slipping slightly on the icy ground. Ethan lunged forward, trying to steady it, but he lost his balance. He fell hard, hitting the frozen earth with a jolt that ran through his entire body. Pain shot up his leg, sharp and sudden, and he realized that he had injured himself. But there was no time to stop. The animal struggled, teetering dangerously close to the creek. Without thinking, Ethan pushed forward again, ignoring the pain, and finally managed to guide it back to safety. Breathing heavily, he leaned against the fence, his face pale from the cold and exertion. His leg throbbed, but he didn't dare sit down for long. There was too much work to do, and he knew that others would be counting on him. Break. Still, as he looked at the animal, safe but shaken, a sense of unease settled over him. The memory of the past, the mistake that had haunted him for years, rose again. He thought of the words he had heard long ago. Don't. It still hurts there. He had ignored them then, and now, decades later, he realized how much they had shaped him. Ethan limped back to the barn, each step deliberate, his mind racing. The accident was minor in comparison to others he had faced, but it was a reminder of his own limitations. He had always prided himself on being able to handle anything, on being strong and capable. Yet the reality was unavoidable. Even the strongest man had boundaries. He had learned that lesson the hard way, and now the winter made it impossible to ignore. The day passed in a blur of chores and careful movement. Ethan fed the animals, repaired broken gates, and checked on the water troughs, all the while nursing the ache in his leg. Buff. He refused to call for help or admit weakness, but the truth was there. He was human, and humans could be hurt, could make mistakes, and could feel fear, even if they didn't like to show it. By late afternoon, the snow had begun to fall more heavily, turning the fields into a white expanse that stretched as far as the eye could see. Ethan paused at the edge of the pasture, looking out at the world he had worked so hard to maintain. The land was beautiful, yes, but unforgiving. It offered no shortcuts, no easy victories. It demanded everything from those who called it home.
Ethan thought about the past, about the person he had hurt, and about the choices he had made that could never be undone.
He felt the weight of it all pressing down, heavier than the snow that now blanketed the earth. That evening, as he sat by the fire in the small cabin on the ranch, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the accident with the cattle and the fear he had felt, and he thought about the accident years ago that had left someone else hurt. The parallels were clear, and he could no longer deny them. The past was not just a memory, it was a warning, a lesson that he had yet to fully understand. The next morning brought more challenges. A young worker, Tom, had come to help with the winter chores. Tom was eager, full of energy, and perhaps a bit naive about the dangers of the ranch in winter. Ethan watched him carefully, noting the way he moved, the way he handled the animals, and the decisions he made. There was potential there, but also recklessness, and Ethan knew it could lead to trouble if not guided.
At first, Ethan tried to give instructions calmly, offering advice and corrections.
But as the morning progressed, Tom made a mistake. He left a gate unsecured, and a few animals wandered too close to the icy creek. Panic surged through Ethan. He shouted warnings, running to prevent disaster. But the stress in his injured leg made his movements slower than usual. The situation was tense, and Ethan realized that despite his years of experience, he was not invincible. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He approached Tom and explained, step by step, how to handle the animals safely. The young man listened intently, his eyes wide with understanding. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was not just about survival. Perhaps it was about teaching, guiding, and passing on knowledge that could prevent future mistakes. The past had hurt him, but now he had a chance to prevent others from suffering in the same way. Even as he instructed, Ethan felt the old guilt creeping in. He remembered the words from long ago, the ones that had haunted him for years. Don't. It still hurts there. He understood now that those words were not just a warning. They were a call for mindfulness, for awareness of the consequences of one's actions. He had ignored them before, and it had caused pain. Now he could not afford to ignore them again. The day wore on with careful work, and by evening, the snowstorm had intensified. Ethan and Tom worked side by side, feeding the animals, checking fences, and ensuring that the ranch remained safe. There was a rhythm to their work, a sense of shared purpose that Ethan had not felt in years. It was exhausting, yes, but there was also satisfaction in knowing that they were doing everything they could to protect the land and the creatures that depended on it.
As night fell, Ethan sat by the fire once more, his legs sore, but his mind clearer.
He realized that he could not live in the past forever. The mistakes he had made were part of him, but so was the ability to learn, to guide, and to protect. This past, he had faced danger, fear, and failure, yet he had also found resilience, hope, and purpose. The ranch demanded strength, but it also offered a chance for redemption, if only he was willing to accept it. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in a blanket of white, and Ethan felt a quiet sense of resolve. He could not change the past, but he could influence the present. He could teach, protect, and act with care. He could live with the memory of his mistakes without letting them define him entirely. And perhaps one day he could find peace, not just for himself, but for those he had once hurt. In the following days, Ethan continued his work with renewed focus. He guided Tom patiently, showing him the nuances of the ranch, the small details that made the difference between safety and disaster. He reflected on his own choices, realizing that strength was not just about physical endurance, but about wisdom, patience, and understanding the consequences of every action. Through the harsh winter, Ethan learned more about himself than he had in years. He faced the limits of his body, the challenges of the land, and the echoes of his past. He recognized the importance of care, of mindfulness, and of humility. And as he worked, he felt a gradual shift within him, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. He was not just tending the ranch, he was shaping a legacy, passing on knowledge, and finding a way to live with both the pain and the hope that life offered. By the time the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Ethan felt stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. The winter had tested him, revealed his vulnerabilities, and forced him to confront the memories that had long haunted him. And in facing those challenges, he had begun to find a way forward, one that included both responsibility and the possibility of redemption. Ethan knew that the past would never disappear completely, that the words he had heard years ago would always linger in his mind, but now he understood them better. They were not a curse, but a lesson. A reminder that actions mattered, that care and caution were essential, and that the choices he made today could shape not only his life but the lives of others. And so, as spring approached, Ethan Mallory continued his work. Stronger, wiser, and more aware than ever. He had faced danger, fear, and the echoes of the past, yet he had emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. The ranch, with its rolling fields, animals, and endless sky, remained both a challenge and a sanctuary, a place where mistakes could teach, where lessons could be learned, and where hope could take root. The early spring air carried a sharp freshness that seemed to awaken every corner of the ranch. Ethan Mallory moved carefully among the fields, his legs still tender from the winter accident, but he refused to slow down. The land demanded attention, and there were always chores that could not be postponed. Still, there was something different in the way he worked now. Each movement, each decision, carried a new awareness. The past winter had taught him lessons about patience, about care, and about the consequences of even small mistakes. Tom, the young worker who had assisted him through the harsh winter, had grown more confident. He followed Ethan's instructions closely, asking questions when unsure, and observing the older man's movements with keen interest. There was a growing bond between them, one built not on friendship alone, but on mutual respect and the shared responsibility of caring for the ranch. Fast, Ethan realized that guiding Tom was teaching him more than just ranch work. It was teaching him patience, reflection, and the humility that came with age and experience.
One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Ethan and Tom were inspecting the northern fence line.
The ground was soft from recent rains, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Ethan noticed that one of the fence posts had rotted, leaning dangerously to one side. The cattle had already begun to press against it, and if it collapsed, several animals could escape, potentially falling into the creek or wandering onto the road. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Tom," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to replace this post today. If we wait, it could be dangerous." "I'll grab the tools," he replied, determination in his tone. Ethan watched him move, and a memory flashed in his mind. The accident years ago, the words he had heard echoing in his mind. "Don't." It still hurts there. He felt a pang of guilt, mixed with determination. Person had suffered because he hadn't paid attention, because he had acted without care. He couldn't let that happen again. "Not here, not now." They worked together, lifting the heavy wooden post into place. Sweat ran down Ethan's face despite the cool spring air, and his hands ached from gripping the tools. Tom struggled too, but Ethan stayed patient, offering guidance without harshness. As they worked, Ethan spoke about the land, about the animals, about the importance of care.
"Every choice matters," he said quietly.
"Bah, even a small mistake can have big consequences. Always remember that."
The day continued with one chore after another.
Ethan's mind wandered, reflecting on the past and the mistakes he had made. He thought about the incident that had haunted him for years, and he felt the familiar tug of guilt. But now, unlike before, he could face it without being consumed by it. He could acknowledge his mistakes, learn from them, and do better. That realization brought a strange sense of peace, mingled with the recognition that he could not undo the past. By late afternoon, the sun had climbed high in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. Ethan and Tom had finished repairing fences, feeding the animals, and checking the water troughs. The ranch was secure for the moment, but Ethan knew that life here was never truly predictable. Back, Storms could come suddenly, animals could fall ill, and accidents could happen in an instant. He had learned that the hard way, and it had made him vigilant, cautious, and deeply aware of the responsibility he carried.
As they returned to the barn, Ethan noticed a neighbor approaching on horseback. Mrs.?
Callahan, an older woman from the town, had always been kind to Ethan. She had watched him grow up, seen him take over the ranch, and respected the work he put into it. Her presence now felt comforting, a reminder that he was not entirely alone in the world.
Ethan, she called out. I heard about the winter accident.
Are you holding up all right? Ethan nodded, forcing a small smile.
I'm fine, Mrs. Rightball.
Bah. Callahan. A little sore, but nothing I can't handle. She studied him for a moment, her eyes soft with concern. You work too hard, you know, Bass. Even the strongest man has limits. Her words struck him in a way they never had before. Bait. She wasn't just speaking about physical limits. She was speaking about life itself, about the balance between work, responsibility, and the need for care, not just for others, but for oneself. Ethan realized she was right. He had spent so many years carrying burdens silently, believing he could handle everything alone. But perhaps it was time to acknowledge that he didn't have to. Back. That evening, as Ethan sat by the fire in his cabin, he felt a wave of exhaustion mixed with clarity. He thought about the lessons of the winter, the young worker he was guiding, and the words that had haunted him for so long. Life was full of challenges, yes, but it was also full of opportunities for growth. Mistakes were painful, but they could teach lessons that nothing else could. The pain he had carried all these years could become a guide, if only he allowed it to. In the following weeks, Ethan faced a series of smaller crises that tested his patience and judgment. One morning, a young calf had fallen into a muddy ditch. Its cries were urgent, echoing across the field, and Ethan knew he had to act quickly. He ran to the calf, calling Tom to help, and together they managed to lift it out safely. The relief was immediate, a sharp contrast to the fear that had gripped them moments before. Through these events, Ethan began to understand a deeper truth. Life on the ranch was unpredictable, and no amount of experience could prepare anyone for every challenge. What mattered was awareness, responsibility, and the willingness to act with care. He saw this reflected in Tom, who had grown more capable and cautious, but still relied on guidance when the unexpected occurred. Teaching Tom was no longer just about farm work. It was about shaping a mindset, one that valued caution, empathy, and foresight. Psst. Ethan's own reflection deepened as he spent quiet evenings alone. Beth. He thought about the person he had once hurt, about the words that had lingered for years, and about the way his choices had affected not just others, but himself. Back. He realized that responsibility was not just about handling the ranch or the animals. It was about acknowledging the impact of one's actions on every life touched. That insight weighed heavily on him, but it also brought a sense of purpose he had not felt before. One afternoon, a local veterinarian came to the ranch to check on a sick horse. "Doctor!" Hopper was kind and thorough, asking questions and observing the animal with careful attention. Ethan appreciated the professionalism, but more than that, he valued the conversation they had while walking between the pens. Dr. Harper spoke about care, patience, and understanding, reinforcing many of the lessons Ethan had begun to grasp on his own. The veterinarian's words resonated with him. Life required vigilance, empathy, and the courage to confront one's own mistakes. By mid-spring, the ranch had recovered fully from the winter hardships. The fields were green, the animals healthy, and the work, though never-ending, flowed more smoothly. Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment, tempered by humility. He knew that the challenges were far from over, but he also knew that he was better prepared to face them, more aware of his own limits, more mindful of the consequences of his actions. and more willing to guide others along the way. Process. The past still whispered to him. He could not forget the incident that had haunted him for years, the words that had echoed in his mind, and the person who had suffered because of his actions. But now, those memories were not paralyzing. They were reminders, teachers of a kind, showing him the importance of care, thoughtfulness, and accountability. He had faced danger, mistakes, and fear, and he had emerged with a clearer understanding of himself and his responsibilities. Ethan also noticed a subtle shift within himself. There was a growing awareness of the importance of connection, of shared experience, and of empathy. He had spent so many years alone, believing that solitude was the only way to protect himself and others. But through teaching Tom, through interacting with neighbors, and through quiet reflection, he realized that connection did not weaken him. It strengthened him. It provided perspective, support, and a reminder that life was never truly solitary. By the end of spring, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the pasture, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, and the air was alive with the scent of blooming flowers and fresh grass. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the beauty around him, but for the lessons he had learned. He had faced challenges, confronted the echoes of his past, and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose.
And yet he knew that life would continue to test him. The ranch would always present unexpected difficulties, and the consequences of choices, both past and present, would continue to shape his journey.
But for the first time in many years, Ethan felt ready. He was stronger, wiser, and more aware of the delicate balance between responsibility, care, and reflection. He was learning to live with the past without being defined by it, and he was beginning to understand that mistakes, while painful, could also lead to growth and insight. Ethan's days now carried a new rhythm. Each morning began with chores, but also with thoughtfulness. Each interaction with Tom or the animals was approached with care and attention. And each evening he allowed himself moments of quiet reflection, acknowledging the lessons of the past while preparing for the challenges of the future. Through it all, he kept the memory of the words that had haunted him for so long. Don't. It still hurts there. They no longer filled him with guilt alone. They had become a guide, a quiet reminder to act with awareness, compassion, and thoughtfulness. They reminded him that life was fragile, that choices mattered, and that responsibility extended beyond oneself.
Ethan Mallory was still the rancher he had always been, strong, capable, and hard-working.
But he had changed. He had learned to face mistakes, to teach and guide others, and to embrace the responsibility that came with both past and present actions. He had discovered the value of connection, the importance of care, and the quiet strength that comes from self-awareness. As summer approached, the ranch stood as a testament to endurance, care, and hard work. Ethan knew that challenges would continue to arise, but he felt ready to meet them with wisdom, patience, and the lessons he had learned through both hardship and reflection. The past had left its mark, but it no longer defined him. He had faced the consequences of choices, understood their impact, and emerged with a sense of clarity, purpose, and hope. The summer sun stretched across the fields, golden and warm, and Ethan Mallory felt a sense of calm he had not known in years. The ranch, once a place of constant struggle and solitude, now felt alive in a way that was comforting rather than exhausting. The animals thrived in the lush grass, fences were repaired, and the rhythm of daily work no longer felt like a burden but a natural part of life. Yet even as the days grew longer and brighter, Ethan knew that the most important changes were happening inside him. Desperation. He had learned to accept the past, to face it without fear, and to carry its lessons forward. The memories of mistakes that had once haunted him now served as guides, reminding him to act with care, patience, and thoughtfulness. He had guided Tom through the winter and spring, teaching him not just how to tend the ranch, but how to make choices that mattered. Through these lessons, Ethan had rediscovered a sense of purpose, one that went beyond hard work and survival. Grasp. It was about growth, connection, and the quiet fulfillment that came from doing the right thing.
One morning, a letter arrived from a distant relative, a cousin Ethan had not seen in years.
She had heard about his work on the ranch and expressed interest in visiting. Her name was Clara, and as soon as he read the letter, something stirred in him. Not curiosity exactly, but a gentle anticipation he had not felt in a long time. Perhaps it was time to let someone into his world, someone who could see both the ranch and the man he had become. When Clara arrived, she brought with her a quiet energy and a warmth that immediately contrasted with the hard edges of ranch life. She was curious, observant, and thoughtful, asking questions about the animals, the land, and the work that Ethan had spent a lifetime perfecting. Ethan found himself speaking more than usual, explaining details he had taken for granted, and noticing how much she genuinely listened. There was no judgment, no expectation, just a shared appreciation for the care and effort that went into maintaining the ranch. Over the following days, Clara helped with small chores. She fed the chickens, checked the fences with Ethan, and even learned how to calm the horses when they were anxious. The tasks were simple yet meaningful, and Ethan realized that he had been craving connection more than he knew. Her presence was a reminder that life could be more than work, that joy could exist alongside responsibility, and that trust could be rebuilt even after years of isolation. As they worked side by side, Ethan began to share pieces of his past, stories he had rarely told anyone. He spoke carefully, revealing mistakes and regrets, but also the lessons he had learned from them. Clara listened with empathy, never interrupting, never judging.
Bething. She asked questions gently, prompting him to reflect in ways he had not before.
For the first time in decades, Ethan felt truly seen, not just as a rancher, but as a man with a complex history, capable of change and growth.
Best. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The sky was a brilliant mix of pink and gold, and the ranch was quiet except for the occasional call of a bird or the distant lowing of cattle. Ethan felt a rare peace settle over him. He had faced winter storms, accidents, and the echoes of his past. He had guided a young worker, repaired fences, and kept the animals safe. And now, in the gentle presence of Clara, he felt a sense of completion he had never thought possible. "Ethan," Clara said softly, "you've done so much here, not just with the ranch, but with your life."
You faced your past, and you've learned from it. That's not easy. He nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. I didn't know if I could.
But I had to try. I couldn't keep living the same way, letting mistakes define me. But she smiled, a small, understanding smile that seemed to light the evening. "And you did it, Bess. You've grown, and you're still growing." Their connection deepened over the weeks. It was slow, careful, and grounded in respect and shared experiences. Ethan had learned the value of patience, and he applied it now, not just to the ranch or the animals, but to relationships. He learned to listen without judgment, to act without pride, and to allow someone else into his life without fear. The walls he had built around himself over decades began to crumble, replaced by trust, empathy, and hope. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fencing together, Ethan paused to rest, leaning on the wooden post. Clara stood beside him, handing him a tool and offering quiet encouragement. "Best." He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much her presence had changed his world. She had not come to fix anything. She had come to share life, to witness the care and effort that defined him, and to remind him that connection was not weakness. It was strength. It was during these quiet moments that Ethan began to understand love in a new way, Not the impulsive, fleeting kind he had known in his youth, but a steady, patient, enduring love built on respect, empathy, and shared experience. As summer deepened, Ethan decided to take a risk he had avoided for years. He invited Clara to stay longer, to spend more time on the ranch, and to become part of the life he had built. She accepted, and in doing so became not just a visitor, but a partner, a witness, and a companion in the ongoing story of the ranch. Their days were filled with work, conversation, and quiet reflection, each moment reinforcing the trust and affection that had grown between them. One evening, as the sun set and painted the fields in deep shades of orange and purple, Ethan spoke quietly. "Clara, I want you to know I've carried a lot in my life. Mistakes, regrets, things I wish I could change. But being here with you, it makes me feel like maybe there's still time to make things right. To live a life that's full, not just of work, but of care, connection, and love."
Clara reached out, placing a hand on his.
Ethan, I see who you are. Not just the rancher, but the man who's learned, grown, and chosen to face life with courage.
That's enough. That's everything.
It was in that moment, under the fading light of the sun, that Ethan realized he was ready to embrace a new chapter of life. One that included not just responsibility and work, but love, trust, and shared purpose. He had faced his past, acknowledged his mistakes, and taken the lessons they offered. Now he could build a future grounded in both experience and hope. In the following weeks, Ethan and Clara continued to work together, both on the ranch and in building a life that balanced care, connection, and joy. They repaired fences, tended animals, and cultivated the land, but they also shared quiet moments of laughter, conversation, and reflection. The ranch became more than a place of work. It became a home, a sanctuary, and a place where both could grow together. As summer turned to early autumn, Ethan made a decision that had once seemed impossible. He asked Clara to marry him, not as a grand gesture, but as a heartfelt expression of the life they had begun to build together. She accepted, and the moment was filled with quiet joy, a reflection of the deep bond they had nurtured over months of work, reflection, and shared experience. The wedding was simple, held on the ranch under a wide open sky, surrounded by the fields, animals, and a few close neighbors who had watched Ethan's journey with respect and admiration. There were no elaborate decorations, no grand celebrations, just the natural beauty of the land, the sincerity of their vows, and the quiet sense of fulfillment that comes from facing the past, embracing the present, and looking forward to the future. As they stood together, hand in hand, Ethan thought of the words that had haunted him for so many years. "Don't. It still hurts there." He understood them now in a new way. They were not a curse, but a reminder too. A reminder that life demanded care, thoughtfulness, and empathy, and that even mistakes could lead to growth, understanding, and love. He had faced the consequences of his actions, learned from them, and found a path forward that included both responsibility and joy. Ethan's life, once defined by solitude, labor, and regret, had transformed. The ranch continued to thrive, but now was more than a place of work. It was a home filled with connection, laughter, and the quiet strength of shared purpose. The animals thrived under their care, the land flourished, and Ethan found himself able to look at the future with hope rather than fear. Through it all, Ethan knew that life would continue to present challenges, but he felt ready to meet them. He had learned the value of patience, the importance of empathy, and the strength that comes from embracing connection. He had discovered love in a slow, steady way, and he understood that true strength came not from isolation, but from the willingness to share life with someone who truly understood him. As the sun set over the ranch that evening, painting the sky in gold and amber, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced winter storms, accidents, and the echoes of a past mistake. He had guided a young worker, repaired fences, and cared for the animals. He had opened his heart to Clara, and in doing so, had discovered a love that was patient, enduring, and real. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude and responsibility alone, had become a place of growth, connection, and joy. And Ethan Mallory, the man who had carried guilt and regret for so long, had finally found peace, not just in his work, but in life itself. He had faced the past, embraced the present, and stepped into a future filled with hope, love, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived.